Okay, where are we gonna put this? Let's try to get this camera together. Hey there, hey. This is Anne-Marie, Ball Girl Will Travel, going live this evening to talk to you guys for another Thursday tea time. And tonight I'm going to talk about my thoughts on Mexico and solo travel safety. Got my wine tumbler today, not my coffee cup. Well, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on Mexico and solo travel safety. As you guys know, Mexico has been in the news lately. Not great news. There was a incident at the beginning of March where 4 Americans were traveling across the border from Brownsville, Texas, into Matamoros, and they were kidnapped. 2 of them were murdered, and 1 was injured. And the woman who was with the group, it was 3 men and 1 woman. They were all Black American, and they were kidnapped. They were recovered, but 2 of the individuals were killed, and 1 of them was injured, and the woman was not physically harmed, as they said in the news, because when something like that happens to you, one can never say that you weren't harmed in any way. So Mexico has been back in the news about safety. I know friends of mine that are travel agents have told me how some of their clients wanted to cancel their trips because of the story, and they were worried about moving to Mexico. So I want, not moving to Mexico, but traveling to Mexico on vacation. So I wanted to come on and talk a little bit about my thoughts about traveling to Mexico and whether I think it's safe to solo travel specifically, which is what I do primarily, is that I travel a lot. I travel to lots of different countries, and I usually do so solo. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you also know that I live in Mexico, but this is not going to be a video about whether I think it's safe to live in Mexico. I think lots of people have done really great videos about that. If you follow Michelle Wedderburn, who does Expat Mexico and has a channel where she talks about all things living in Mexico. She did a great live a week or so ago talking about living in Mexico and safety. So I don't think I need to talk about that, but I wanted to talk a little bit about my thoughts about traveling. Because I live here, but I also travel a lot around Mexico, and I also do that solo. I'm getting ready to head to Puerto Vallarta in a bit for a couple of days of rest and relaxation and sunshine. So I will share some thoughts. The short answer to the question of whether I think Mexico is safe for solo travel is yes, but not always. And so I'm going to qualify that with a not always. And what I will say is there are certain parts of Mexico that I think are perfectly safe to travel to and even to solo travel to as women and women over 40 and 50. And then there are parts of Mexico and things that I would say not to do and places I would say not to go. And so first I'm going to talk a little bit about what I would say relevant to safety, and what I would say for the most part is what I always tell people when they're planning to travel anywhere solo is to have a safety plan. I have a travel safety guide that I wrote. I used to oversee security in my other life. It was part of my job. Hey there, Marcia. So talking about safety and security and travel is not foreign to me. It's something I used to do for a living. It was part of my job. So it was something I was always thinking about because I was responsible for hundreds and sometimes thousands of people traveling around the world. I was responsible for making sure that they were safe. I took it very seriously. So it's something I take seriously now as I travel on my own, and I use a lot of the things that I learned doing that kind of work and from the security guys that also worked with me, who were, ex-military guys and other security specialists that I worked with and who worked with me. I use a lot of those principles still as I travel around the world, not just in Mexico, but everywhere I go. But what I would say is, if you're traveling solo to Mexico, I think it's important to pay attention. I don't think you should live and die by them, but you should pay attention to the U.S. State Department advisories, understanding that there are there's a lot of politics that goes into who's on those lists, what advisories they have, and so on. And so I think it's important to pay attention to what it says, but it's also important to use common sense and understand that there are political aspects to some of what goes out in those advisories. That being said, generally speaking, I would say that if you're coming to Mexico to travel, don't travel to border towns. Towns that are along the border between Texas, Arizona, California. Generally, towns that are on the right, directly on the other side of the border, are usually not safe places to be. Even Tijuana, which is somewhat of a tourist destination, is a place that I personally wouldn't go on vacation. I might go there if I was on my way to San Diego, but it's not a place that I ever thought, I want to go spend a week in Tijuana, right? So generally speaking, a lot of the problematic activity that happens along the border. And so I would discourage people from spending time in those places. I'm not a person who would ever drive to Mexico. I know people do it and they do it safely every day, but that's something I would probably not encourage someone to do either. I would also say to fly into the country if you're going on vacation and fly to the destination. I think most of the tourist destinations are safe. They're relatively safe, just like I describe pretty much anywhere I go as relatively safe because bad things can happen anywhere. But I would say places like Cancun, Tulum, Playa del Carmen, Riviera Maya, Puerto Vallarta, those are typical tourist destinations. They're pretty safe to travel to. I'm going to mention some others because, I'm not a person who always wants to be at the beach and always wants to be in places where there are a lot of tourists. I think there are lots of other places that are also tourist destinations that are not on the beach that are pretty wonderful places to solo travel to safely in Mexico and are very, are quite safe for travel. And that would include San Miguel de Allende, which is where I live. Mexico City, which I think is a first class city, a great destination for travel, just like you would travel to Los Angeles or New York City or Chicago. I would definitely say, London, Paris, any of those places. I put Mexico City in the same category as those cities. And so if you're traveling to somewhere like Mexico City, I would say exercise the same level of situational awareness, which is what I call paying attention to your instincts, paying attention to your surroundings, not just blithely walking around and not knowing what's going on around you. But you'd want to have the same level of situational awareness that you would have in any major city that you're visiting. But I really love going to Mexico City. It's like it has everything. It has the art, the culture, the music, the nightlife, great food, fantastic, like top-notch restaurants. I think some of the two of the top restaurants on the top restaurants in Latin America list are in Mexico City. So if you want to have that kind of like big city experience in Mexico City, I also really enjoy Guadalajara, which I think is the second largest city in Mexico. I really enjoy Oaxaca, which I think if you're into, if you really want to understand the culture of Mexico and history of Mexico and have really great food, Oaxaca is somewhere that you should put on your list. I call it the New Orleans of Mexico. I highly recommend it. It's a great place to go solo travel safely. That is not a beach town. There have been incidents in Cancun and Tulum. So while I think they're great places to visit and I still think that they're safe, I do think that you should exercise awareness when you're in those places and just I'm not very big on big crowds and festivals and things like that. I just don't really like them at this point in my life because I don't like crowds of people. I've definitely always avoided those kinds of things in the States. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I was really not big on going to big crowds to the 4th of July and all those things. I would watch the fireworks somewhere from a distance, but not downtown with all the people. So if you like crowds and lots of people, those destinations are always packed, especially in high season, which is, the fall going into the new year. Summertime is less busy, but it's always busy all year round. Cancun and Riviera Maya areas, they're really always crowded. Places that I really like that I think are very safe for travel in Mexico, if you like beaches, is I think Isla Holbox is very nice. I've written about it in my blog. I think it's a great place to visit. I would say if you're interested in, it's an island off the coast of in Quintana Roo on the side where Cancun is. It's absolutely beautiful. You have to take a ferry to get there. I would avoid going there in the summer, which is rainy season and mosquito season, but I would definitely recommend going there between February and April when the weather is probably milder, the humidity is lower, and it's a safe place to be. To my knowledge, it's very low crime. Like they don't have a lot of even petty crime there. Now, anywhere that you go in Mexico that has a lot of tourists, you do need to pay attention to your belongings, your purses, your iPhones, things like that. I don't know of a lot of incidents of people being confronted and robbed in Mexico, Americans especially. I'm sure it happens, but I don't know of a lot of incidents of that. But I do know that there are incidents of people's things getting stolen if they just put it down somewhere not or not paying attention, like phones and wallets, like hanging your purse on the back of a chair in a restaurant, things like that I see people do a lot when I'm traveling, and I always like shake my head when I see it, not just in Mexico. I remember one day being on a square and this woman having her bag hanging off the back of her chair in a square in Venice, and I shook my head because anyone could just walk by and take her bag. So just things like that. Don't do those things, especially when you're in high tourist traffic parts of the country. You should, be careful of your belongings. Don't just put your stuff down. I write a lot about ways that you can conceal your money, things like wrist wallets, which I really am a big fan of. I also like, there's a wallet that you can buy that you can attach to your bra and wear on the inside of your clothes. Really love that one. I write about all those things. There are links to them in my blog and on my profile on Instagram and my Amazon, my found it on Amazon list. I really believe those kinds of things are useful if you're solo traveling in Mexico, to use, common sense, situational awareness. Don't, avoid border towns. I can't even imagine any reason why someone would visit. I feel really bad about what happened to the Americans that were in Matamoros, but I'm really baffled that they were there even for medical procedures. Matamoros is not a place that I've ever heard anyone saying that you should go for medical procedures, whether it's cosmetic or otherwise. The places that I know people go for medical procedures in Mexico is usually Mexico City, Cancun. I've heard of people going to Puerto Vallarta for certain things, but I'd never heard of people going to Matamoros for medical procedures. So I was really surprised to hear that. I'm not saying that that's not why they were there. It was just not somewhere that I've ever heard people say, oh, if you want to go get a procedure, that's where you should go. I know that people go to Mexico City. It's known for having really good medical doctors and facilities and things like that. But I'd never heard of anyone going to the border for medical procedures. And I would say, even if you hear of something like that, it's probably not a good idea. The border is known for being a dangerous part of the country. And so all of those cities and towns that are along the border, I would highly recommend that people avoid going into those places because it's unpredictable. Local Mexicans, if you talk to them, would tell you that those are places to be avoided. So the only time I'd ever heard anyone talk of Matamoros here in Mexico, they always talked about it as being a dangerous place. And that's the case in Mexico. You can go to one part of a state and it's perfectly safe, and then you can go to another part of the state and it's very dangerous. I live in the state of Guanajuato. I live in San Miguel. San Miguel is known for being a relatively safe place. Since I've been living here, there've been small incidents, but nothing that I've even really heard or seen. I just know because I have heard from local people about things that have happened. The main things that happen here is sometimes people break into people's homes when they're not there. And this is a place where there are a lot of people who have their homes empty for lots of months of the year because they only live here part-time. And so it is known that you need to have security and things like that. But I've not heard of a lot of violent crime here. But right up the road is Celaya, which is known to be a very dangerous place. And it's probably about 45 minutes or an hour away from here. So it's kind of like, I used to live in Washington, D.C., and in D.C. was very similar to that. You could live on one street and it would be perfectly fine, and 5 blocks away was, bang, bang, shoot 'em up every night. It can be like that in parts of Mexico, and it can be like that in parts of lots of places. So I think it's important to, travel and carry your brain with you. Exercise caution wherever you go. Don't think just because you're going on vacation that you can just let your guard down, leave your stuff all over the place, not pay attention to your belongings. Be careful as women. I really recommend that if you're planning to go out at night, that you should make arrangements ahead of time for how you're getting there and how you're getting back. Whether you get a car service, do your homework on Uber, make sure that Ubers are reliable there, and about how you should go about paying, whether it's by credit card or cash. In Mexico, Uber works just like in the United States in most places. Again, in certain parts of Mexico, getting an Uber in certain places are a problem because they're at war with the taxi union. So you want to do your homework about those kinds of things too, because you don't want to get caught in the middle of a fight between the taxi driver and the Uber driver. But do your homework. Make sure you do read the travel advisories. Depending on where you're going in Mexico, make sure you look it up. You might even register with Smart Traveler. There's a thing called Smart Traveler that the U.S. State Department provides, where you can register with the consulate, and they will contact you if something's wrong. Depending on where I'm going, sometimes I use that service, and it's been helpful because they have sent me emails telling me about protests sometimes, places to avoid in the city because of protests and things like that. So it's a helpful thing if you have those kinds of concerns. Do I use it in Mexico? No. But it is a service that's available. I think the advisories are useful for informational purposes, but I don't think that you should not come to Mexico because the U.S. State Department says that Matamoros is dangerous. Matamoros is on the border between Texas and Mexico. That's across from Brownsville. Nobody goes to Matamoros on vacation, as far as I know. So it's kind of like saying you're not going to go to the United States because there are shootings in Chicago. To me, it's the equivalent of taking that position. And in my opinion, the United States is a far more dangerous place to live and be, especially for Black people, than Mexico. So the things that I think you need to be careful about in Mexico is not necessarily your physical safety so much as the safety of your belongings, and also things like if you're going to stay in an Airbnb, making sure that you know whether or not there is a carbon monoxide detectors, whether there are smoke detectors in the house. If they're not, that you bring one with you or don't stay there. Airbnb now tells you if a place has smoke detectors or not. Now they make a point of like having a caption in the description. You're more likely to die of carbon monoxide poisoning as a tourist in Mexico if you stay in an Airbnb than getting shot. So that's something I think we should be thinking about as solo travelers. Those kinds of things, more so than that somebody's going to run our car off the road and shoot us in the head. That's more likely to happen to you down the street from where you live if you live in the United States, or at the supermarket, or at the movies, or at church, or in traffic, and I could go on, right? So I think it's more the thing that you have to be more concerned about in Mexico with things like making sure you don't put your purse down, even for a minute in a store, put your phone down and turn your back, things like that. I also think you have to be careful about where you choose to stay and always make sure that you stay somewhere that is safe and well maintained. Ask questions, and if you don't feel comfortable, don't stay there. I remember one time being in an Airbnb and I got out of the shower and I could smell gas. So I messaged the host and I was like, it was the last night I was going to be there. And I said to the host, I smell gas, what is that? And he was like, oh, nothing to worry about. That happens sometimes when you use the hot water in the shower. And he was saying, oh, it's nothing to worry about. But I made a mental note that I would never stay in that Airbnb again, even though I had enjoyed being there. I liked where it was located. I decided not to stay there again because I felt like if you can smell gas, they should have some kind of there are these plugins that you can buy and I have one in my rental that lets you know if there's any kind of gas leak, because there's a tank on the roof where I live. So I have not only carbon monoxide detectors, but also gas leak detectors. And I felt like he was a little bit too nonchalant about the fact that one could smell gas inside of the apartment. So things like that, you might want to ask questions about whether or not, the hot water heater is on the premises, where it's located. Is there the gas in a tank, or whether it is piped into the house or apartment. And if it's piped, if it's in a tank, ask if there are gas leak detectors on the premises, right? Not just carbon monoxide detectors. So these are all the things that I actually think are more important in Mexico than worrying about being attacked on the highway by the cartel, which is probably not going to happen if you're not involved in any kind of illegal activity. I feel that it's just my personal opinion, but I feel that there's a lot that we don't know surrounding what happened at the beginning of this month in Matamoros, and I don't think we're ever going to know. And I personally don't want to necessarily know all the details, but I do feel that, generally speaking, unless you're traveling to places on the border or places right adjacent to the border, you're pretty safe traveling in Mexico. Again, I think you have to exercise caution. Driving, if you're driving across the border, I would say you should be careful. If you're planning to drive into Mexico, there are groups on Facebook of people who drive in groups, depending on where they're going. I would say to drive with other groups of people, especially depending on where you're going in the state. And they always say to stay on the toll roads. Don't go on the free highway. Drive on the toll roads to go wherever you're going. I have never personally driven. I always hire someone to drive me if I have to go like to Mexico City or something. I'll hire a service to get me there, or I'll take the bus. And I fly most everywhere else that I'm going. I'm going to Puerto Vallarta, as I said. Puerto Vallarta is one of my favorite places in Mexico. I'm flying there. I would not drive. It's too far anyway. But I do think that as a visitor coming on vacation, if you fly into the country and you are going to any of the places that I mentioned, you're going to be fine. I'm very interested in traveling to places that other people don't necessarily visit who aren't from Mexico. So I'm going to go to Chiapas and visit Veracruz this summer, Orizaba more than likely, and some other places. And I will share that with you guys. But most of the places that people visit as tourists in Mexico are safe, in my opinion. It's safe to travel as a group. It's safe to travel as an individual. People are very welcoming. They will treat you well. They will look out for you. But you have to also intend to look out for yourself. So as single women, whether you in Mexico or Croatia or, a beach bar on Zanzibar, don't be getting shit-faced drunk when you out by yourself. Don't leave your drinks unattended. That's not the time for that. Do that when you're with your girlfriends and somebody has responsibility for watching the drinks when you go to the bathroom. When you're traveling by yourself, you do have to exercise, I think, more caution and be more conservative, especially in a foreign country where you don't know anybody. But that goes for everywhere, not just Mexico. Even at the all-inclusives and all those kinds of places where I think people go and the drinks are flowing and everything is included and they get loose and whatever. I think if you're there by yourself, don't get as loose as everybody else, because you don't have anybody watching your back and watching your stuff. It's just you. So things like that I think are very important. You should always have someone wherever you live who knows where you are at all times, who has, you can add them to the find your phone while you're on vacation. You should be checking in with someone a couple times a day when you're traveling by yourself, so that someone knows where you are. So if you don't show up somewhere where you're supposed to be, somebody's going to notice. Those things are important, but they're not just for Mexico. But I know that when people come to Mexico, especially Americans, they act the fool. I mean, when I go to places like Cancun and Playa and Puerto Vallarta, I see us, and I mean us, not just them. out there acting the fool sometimes. And I'm just like, and it's fine. You're on vacation. And again, if you're not all alone, cut up as much as you want. But those of us who are traveling solo, one of the things that I would say is to be more careful and aware because you are by yourself, to be a little bit more conservative so that you have your faculties and you're looking out for yourself. I'm going to look at a little bit of comments. I can't always see all the comments. I got to look. Okay. Oh, great. You purchased some of the items from my list. Yeah, I really think that having a carbon monoxide detector and asking questions of your host before you book Airbnbs, especially with Airbnbs, is important. But I will tell you, for me, I take carbon monoxide detectors everywhere I go, because even in the US, it doesn't mean they always have them. They may have smoke detectors everywhere, but they don't always have carbon monoxide detectors, even in hotels. So it's something that I definitely think you should take with you. But in a place where in Mexico, where they don't really have any requirements, like really outside of the United States and maybe a couple places in Europe, they don't necessarily have laws requiring that you have these things in your home or in hotels or in buildings. So I operate on the assumption that nobody has one. And I just take one everywhere I go, because I've actually heard of people dying from carbon monoxide poisoning in Mexico that aren't Americans. Right? It's something that happens here, especially in the if you're somewhere that gets cold, like where I live. That when people turn on the heat, they have these fireplaces. They're not venting anywhere. So everything is coming right back into the house. There's no requirement that they vent, like the chimneys look pretty. They have the fireplaces, but then you look up and you see it's all bricked up and the smoke's not going out of the house. So these are things that are common here. So you've got to pay attention, ask questions, especially if you're staying in a rental, whether it's Airbnb, VRBO, home away, I don't care what it is. If it's not a hotel, make sure you ask those questions. Ask the hotels as well if that's a concern to you. But I say err on the side of bringing a portable carbon monoxide with extra batteries. My batteries actually went dead on me in Zanzibar, and I had to go find some new ones, right? Because the batteries I hadn't checked them. I usually check them before I leave. Hadn't checked them, and the batteries were dying. Well, one of them was dying, so I was able to get another battery. But check your batteries. Make sure you have batteries and maybe a couple extra ones just in case. And bring your own. Because to me, that's probably one of the biggest risks that we don't really talk that much about is carbon monoxide poisoning. Smoke, dying from, if there's a fire. These things happen in hotels and in homes. That's more likely to happen, I think, than what happened in Matamoros at the beginning of March. So I'm not saying that they're not random things that happen, but it's not the way it is in the United States. So it's less likely, especially if you're in a tourist bubble, what I call the tourist bubble towns, that any of those kinds of things are going to occur. You instead need to be more conscious of your personal belongings, and then be very careful if you're going to stay in a rental. So this is going to be a short live today because I am not feeling the greatest and I really don't have anything else to add on. So unless anyone has questions for me, I'm probably going to sign off early today because I'm a little tired. I'm a little under the weather, but I didn't want to not show up. Anybody got questions? So the long and short of it, as I said, for me is that Mexico was safe for solo travel. Mexico was safe for solo travel before the events of March, of the earlier this month, and Mexico is still safe for solo travel, in my opinion. And if something were to happen that I thought made that untrue, I would say so, right? But in my opinion, it remains a safe place to solo travel for us, especially those of us who are single women traveling by ourselves. But you do need to exercise common sense, situational awareness, pay attention to your belongings, don't get loose or too loose. Keep your faculties with you at all times if you're traveling by yourself. Make sure you pay attention to your personal belongings, especially iPhones. I've heard a lot of stories about people's iPhones. Somebody putting down an iPhone and turning their back, and they turn their back and it's gone. So, securing your iPhone, having a process for finding it and shutting it off, which is something I'm guilty of not always doing. So I've gotten a lot more serious about that. Knowing what you will do if your iPhone gets stolen, like what things do you have in there and how are you going to get access to that stuff? If you have to, your phone gets stolen, you got to shut everything down. Like making sure you have certain backups and things like that. Making sure that your phone is not easy for anyone to get into. So using, Face ID, fingerprinting, but also knowing how to find your phone, how to shut your phone, quickly get it shut down. So making sure you have a way to get access to all the information that stores on our phones, because everything's on our phones nowadays, but making sure that like how to get into your Gmail account without having to and how to do you have all your two-factor authentication going to your phone, or might you consider moving some of that stuff to email? So, and we're keeping your passwords for your email somewhere else outside of your phone, so that if you need to get into your get access to those things, you are not completely locked out, because your authenticator and all your two-factor authentication and everything is going to one place, which is the phone that somebody stole. So these kinds of things are things that I think you should think about, because in Mexico, iPhones are popular for getting stolen. Don't walk down the street with your iPhone in your back pocket. I see people do that a lot. It makes me crazy. Don't hang your purse on the back of your chair in restaurant. Don't even put your purse on the table. I always keep my purse in my lap, and I keep it on my body and in my lap where I can put my hand on top of it. Wear cross bodies. Keep your valuable things right on your person. I usually put a charger and my iPhone in my crossbody, but I put my money is always on my person somewhere. I don't keep it in a purse, and my credit cards. So just, thinking about things like that. And I've written about all these things in blogs and done posts about them on Instagram. But keeping all those things, hi there, Kenya, in mind when you're traveling in and around Mexico is important. But be less worried about, some of the things that you read about in the news, and more concerned about your physical belongings, and safeguarding those things, and protecting yourself by being situationally aware, staying in places that are safe, doing your homework about where you're going to be staying in the neighborhoods. I really encourage people to read the reviews on Airbnb, to stick to Superhost. I know that sometimes they cost more money, but Superhost have something to protect, which is their Superhost status. And so I really tend to only book with Superhost, and so far I have had very good experiences at Airbnbs. Always travel with a carbon monoxide detector and ask questions about gas. That's really a big one to me, because in Mexico, a lot of places, it's not like the US where there are gas lines are under the ground and that kind of stuff. In some places, the gas tanks are on the rooftop, or they're somewhere on the premises. And so that's something you might want to ask questions about as well. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope you got some good information out of it. Yes, it is safe to travel to Mexico. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend that you consider not just traveling to the beach, the tourist destinations like Tulum and Cancun and Playa and Puerto Morelos. But think about, visit Holbox, go to Bacalar, check out Mahahuel, Costa Maya. There are lots of really cool places, Mazunte, Oaxaca State, Hutuco, Puerto Escondido. There are lots of really cool places. I'm going to Cabo for the first time this summer, so I shall report back on my thoughts. I'm going to visit Cabo. I'm going to visit La Paz, which is in the state of Baja, California as well. I'm going to Baja, California for the first time. And there are lots of small, beach towns and so on that I'm looking forward to exploring. So get off the beaten path a little bit is what I'm saying as a solo traveler. Do the tourist things first, but then consider going and visiting places like Mexico City and Oaxaca and Guadalajara and San Miguel de Allende and Querétaro. You'll be glad that you did. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I'll see you guys not next week. There's not going to be a live next week. But I'll see you guys the first Thursday of April. So have a good Friday tomorrow. Have a good week. And I'll see you guys in the next Thursday tea time in about a week from next Thursday. Thanks for coming to my live, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.